Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Something You Fear, Volume 5, Story Number 1. It was just before 9 p.m. and my wife had already retired to her bedroom. She said she was extremely tired and intended to get some sleep, and would I mind? My eldest son, Stephen, age 15, was in his room preoccupied with a computer. His room was adjacent to the bedroom where my wife had just fallen asleep. Stephen was blaring the music on his computer rather loudly, as teenagers usually do, and I was concerned he would disturb Anne's slumber. I entered Stephen's room and requested that he not play the music at such a high volume, lest he awaken his mother. I then walked out of his room and into the kitchen to prepare a cup of coffee. I looked up just in time to see Anne walk slowly past me and immediately knew that she was awakened by the loud music. She probably was not too happy about being disturbed in that manner. I guess that was why she just wasn't talking to anyone. I didn't actually see her face, but saw her from the back as she passed by me. Not turning around, she walked slowly but steadily. She was wearing a blue housecoat over her white pajamas, and I contemplated how it contrasted with her hair and how her locks seemed to appear slightly more blonde than their usual brownish color. This was odd because when I saw her before she went to bed, I recalled that she was wearing a white cream-colored housecoat. She was wearing her usual white slippers, and the hairstyle was Anne's. Even the way she walked was familiar, but something didn't seem quite right. She didn't say a word or even look back as I watched her walk on into the living room, past my youngest son, Ryan, age 9, who was sitting in a lounge chair. He was watching the TV intensely. She hadn't said a word to Ryan or even acknowledged his presence as she continued to walk right past him, almost brushing against his left arm, straight to the door. She opened it and then shut it behind her, without looking back, as she walked outside. I never once saw her face. Well, by not saying a word or even looking at us as she walked on past and then outside, I surmised that Anne was extremely upset and that it might be better if I didn't immediately follow her and ask if everything was all right. She probably had just gone outside to sit at the table that was on the deck, just to get some fresh air. So I sat on the couch in the living room and pretended to read a newspaper, as I anticipated the return after her temper had cooled down a bit. About 5 minutes passed while I sat there, so I finally decided to go outside and console her. I went out the same door she had exited and was surprised and alarmed that Anne wasn't sitting at the table as I had expected. In fact, she was nowhere to be seen. It was pitch dark, and it didn't make any sense that she would walk off into the night like that. Alarmed, I loudly called out her name a few times, but there was no response. Not quite knowing what to do next, I ran back in the house to get a flashlight so I could go search for her. Maybe she had walked out to her car, but it was too dark for me to see. I rushed back into the living room, saw Ryan sitting there, and asked him if he had noticed where Mom had gone. He proclaimed that he hadn't seen her go outside, and as far as he knew, she was still in bed sleeping. I figured that since Ryan was watching TV, he was oblivious to all that had occurred. When asked, Stephen said he didn't see Mom walk past his open bedroom door either. I ran outside again and called out her name, but there still was no reply. "Dad, Mom is in bed. She must be because we didn't see her leave the house," exclaimed Ryan. "She's not in bed," I protested. "Stephen rudely awakened her and she got upset and walked outside. Are you sure you didn't see her walk right past you and out the door?" Just to prove to Ryan, Stephen, and myself that Anne was gone, I decided to have a look in her bedroom. And there she was. My wife was fast asleep in her bed. Anne was startled when I awoke and related what had happened. So half asleep, she didn't really comprehend what I was talking about. She told me she had not left the room, and I must have just imagined the whole episode. Was Anne sleepwalking? It's not likely. Anne has never had any history of sleepwalking. Additionally, we live in a small house, and there are only two doors. Both doors can be seen from the living room, kitchen, and even from where I was standing outside. Ryan, Steven, or I would have seen her return to the house and to her bedroom. Also, I was right about the housecoat. Anne has a white housecoat. So, who was that lady? I've determined that 25 to 30 seconds elapsed from when I first looked up and saw her walk past me in the kitchen, over to Ryan in the living room, then straight to the door, open it, walk outside, and close the door behind her. I also watched her walk past the living room window when she was outside. I was the only one who saw the lady. She didn't appear as an apparition, but as a real, live flesh and blood person. I recall clearly seeing her light blue housecoat moving as she walked by me, and remember seeing her hands and wrists protruding out a long sleeve of the housecoat. I heard the door hinges creak, as they always do when she opened it. I heard the familiar clink when it was closed. No, sir, this was not my imagination running rampant. I cannot think of any reason for the lady to have visited our house. We built this house on vacant land 15 years ago and are the only family that has lived here. I have not found anything to be unusual about this land on which we live. It used to be jungle before it was developed and subdivided into residential lots around 30 years ago. I've only encountered the lady this one time, and I've never had an experience like this ever before. I've never been a ghost hunter, but now I'm definitely a ghost believer. I just can't help but wonder, why has this happened? Why was I the only one to see the lady? What can I do to meet her again? Next story. Okay, this is going to sound really freaky, but here it goes. Back when I was in 8th grade, I used to go to this real old elementary, junior high school. On the first Tuesday back to class after the new year, me and my friends were helping my teacher move some stuff from her classroom from upstairs to one downstairs. The teacher was one of my friend's moms. Well, anyway, me and my friend Gary were bringing a miniature refrigerator down the stairs while the others were still upstairs. We walked through the doors of the foyer and walked down to the 4th grade area. Suddenly, when we were close to our destination, Gary dropped the fridge. Actually, I started yelling at him, telling him that it wasn't that heavy. He told me to turn around and look towards the library doors. I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I turned around anyway, and I saw a little boy wearing the school's old uniform. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. He looked human, but he was sort of transparent in a way. He was laughing at me and Gary. We looked at each other and slowly tried to creep away back upstairs. Then we turned around to see a grown man dressed like a janitor or something, with his arms crossed, looking at us. He looked like the boy, transparent. We heard the boy behind us stop laughing, and then he talked in a kind of humorous voice. "You're not supposed to be here. It's our time. Wild's going to teach you a lesson." The man in front of us turned his face into an angry one and gave out a screeching yell. Gary and I looked at each other and began to run. I accidentally ran toward the man and went right through. It was the scariest thing I had ever experienced. We ran upstairs and went in the classroom. All of our friends and teachers were in. We both had tears in our eyes and were shaking. After telling our friends about what we had experienced, the next day one of the women that worked in the office came to me and Gary in the morning and asked us to come with her to the office. We thought we were going to get in trouble. Then we went into the office and saw the principal. He told us that Miss Robinson, the teacher from the previous night, had told him about what we had seen. He asked if it was true, and we said yes. He soon showed us 2 old yearbooks, one from 1943 and another from 1961. In the earliest one, he showed us a picture of a 4th grader who once went to the school. We both shouted when we saw the boy and told the principal that we had seen him the night before. Then he pulled out the one from 1961 and showed us the group picture of the faculty. There was a janitor named Mark. We realized that he was the one we had seen that night. The principal said that both of these people had died while being at the school. The boy had died by drowning in the school's pool, and the janitor had died from a heart attack. The principal told us this wasn't the first time someone had seen them. We were scared. He told us not to be scared and not to tell any of the other kids about what we saw. Next story. I grew up in a family of 7 people. 5 brothers and sisters, mother and father. I lived in a house that had been on our street since the 1920s. A few of the elderly neighbors who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years claimed that there had been a murder in the house many years ago involving a woman and her young daughter. The things that happened in the house affected all of my family members to a point that we just ignored it. That is, until time had passed and we were far enough of a distance from it to talk about it freely. When I was 16, I remember a good deal of strange and peculiar instances that could not be explained. One night, as I could not sleep, I tried to sleep on the floor. My sister slept on the top bunk. As I lay sleeping on the floor, I remember just as I went to sleep, a surging wave rolled beneath me as if the floor were moving. It scared me so much that I woke up quickly and jumped into the top bunk with my sister. I was never able to explain it. I had difficulty sleeping as a teenager after that experience. There were many nights while I lay dozing off when someone would knock on the door. I had everyone's door knock memorized. It sounded like my father's knock, but there was no shadow cast under the door where the hall light was. It didn't appear that anyone was outside my door. When I opened a door, I never saw anyone. These were my experiences. My entire family had shared that they had heard the voice of a little girl coming from the attic. Also, my father and younger brother had claimed to have seen an image of what looked like a green-colored cherubim. Both my father and brother are serious people who do not embellish life with stories. It took a few years for them to confess they had seen this apparition. As I grew up and got married, only my parents were left alone in the house to experience the accelerated activity. In the late 1980s and early 90s, they had problems with lights flickering on and off. The room in the original part of the house in the back did not have a raised foundation with the newer part of the house. That room was the coldest room in the house. On nights when it should not have been cold, there would be frost on the walls. This room was where all of my brothers and sisters had seen either an apparition or shared experiences. My mother saw a very heavy and large picture fall off the wall directly over her head. She could feel a force of pressure around her head as the glass to the picture broke into pieces around her. Yet somehow her head was untouched. She had later explained that it must have been some kind of guardian angel. A photo was captured of my brother standing outside. In the picture, red eyes can be seen in the living room as the front door was standing open. To this day, I have refused to look at the photo, and my family passes it around to show people. Sadly, after my family moved out, the house met with a terrible tragedy. One night, a man who lived in the neighborhood tossed a candle through the back bedroom window to send the house into a blaze of flames. It was the original part of the house that had caught fire and spread to the rest of the house to completely destroy it. When the police picked up the arsonist, they discovered that he had burned over 50 structures in Kokomo. My house was the last before he was arrested. He told authorities that he had heard a voice come from the back portion of the house telling him to burn it down. As the man was an arsonist, I would imagine he thought the same with every structure he burned. But somehow it does not surprise me that he would make such a claim about the disquieted home I grew up in. If there was a spirit there, it was disquieted and trapped. The place where my house stood now looks like a little green glade or park right in the middle of the neighborhood. The trees canopy the entire front of the yard and serve to remind me that there was great memories in the home. My father recently passed away at the young age of 58. My mother, brother, and sisters still return to the place my father raised us and recount good memories. Those are the ones that I want to remember concerning him. But the house was a place I am glad no longer stands as a trap to whatever spirit haunted it. I hope it has been released. Next story. I moved into my aunt's house at the beginning of last year. When I would visit her before I moved in, I never felt comfortable. I always felt like there was someone staring at me and watching my every move, especially in my room and in the living room. One morning around 2 a.m., I woke up to go to the bathroom. The bathroom is located on the other side of the hall, right in front of my room. If both doors are open, you can see from one room to the other. I was in the bathroom and I felt like there was someone standing right behind me. I got goosebumps and the room became extremely cold. I just ignored it until I was about to walk out of the bathroom and I glanced into my room. Sitting right on my bed was a woman dressed in a nightgown. She didn't look real, she looked kind of like a doll. She was very pale. I only saw her for a few seconds before I ran to my aunt's room and started freaking out. I wouldn't go into my room again that night. The next morning, my aunt and I were talking about the house and the previous owners. She told me that a woman had died in the house. Her husband had suffocated her with a pillow until she died. I believe this happened in my room. The house was added into. It used to have just one bedroom, a kitchen, a living room, and one bathroom. A laundry room and bathroom were added on. About 3 weeks later, I woke up to a freezing room and my bed shaking. I ignored the cold and thought that there was a dog on my bed scratching or something. I kicked around to see if one of them was on my bed and there wasn't. My bed was just shaking and shaking and shaking. I pulled the covers over my head and started crying. I knew there was something in my room. When I finally stopped shaking, I heard the door creak, like someone was walking on it and coming towards one side of my bed. I opened my eyes and there was no one there. This is when I ran to my aunt's room again and started freaking out again. Next story. Growing up in a Hispanic family, one is used to hearing ghost stories, many of which are passed on generation after generation. I had always been a believer, but with very little personal experience. After moving to New Mexico from Southern California in 1999, all doubts would be removed forever. I had been employed for the past 3 years at the Lodge Resort, nationally known for its haunting by the ghost Rebecca. Although I never experienced many things that could not be explained during my employment, a story for another day, the haunting at the lodge is minimal in comparison to the events that occurred in the house in which I lived just a short time ago. I'm still not able to provide a logical explanation to what my family, friends, and myself had been witness to in that house, only a stone's throw from the lodge resort. The details of all the events that had occurred over the 4 years I lived in the house are too numerous to list. I'll try to remember only those events that seem to be the most significant, but I apologize for what I'm sure will end up being a lengthy story. To be honest, the idea of having to recall such experiences is unnerving. From the moment my 4 young children and I moved in, something didn't feel right. Even the events leading to the previous tenants moving out seemed suspicious, having only managed to stay 5 months of the 6 month lease they had acquired. The gentleman did not have a clear reason why he was moving, other than driving distance to work, a mere 20 minutes. He also didn't want us to go downstairs at all. When one views a house they might potentially be moving into, it's abnormal to be told you can't see all of the house. I had no idea of his reasoning, but I was desperate and took the house anyway. Long-term rentals were extremely hard to come by in this village. I thought perhaps it was just a sensation of an unknown house, and I did my best to dismiss it, unsuccessfully. In the evenings, I found myself unexpectedly fearful of passing by the staircase leading to my bedroom. I had no idea at the time why it would affect me in such a way. The only other time I could recall ever feeling this kind of unexplained fear was as a child while living in an apartment complex in California, which I later discovered was also haunted. It would be a long time before I would be able to sleep in my own room, and that would end up being very short-lived. Two family members who had visited the house with me on a separate occasion prior to my moving had strange reactions to the house as well. Both seemed unnerved when they explored the downstairs bedroom. Eventually, one of them was never to return. She was too afraid to be in my house after the things she experienced. The other relative asked if I wanted him to board up the bedroom. I was surprised at his extremely odd offer. Who does such things? He never did give a reason for wanting to do it. We had not been in the house long enough to know there was anything to be fearful of. The bedroom had a separate, smaller room I used as an office, separated only by a sheer curtain in a doorway. The room itself had no door to shut it off from the rest of the house, only a staircase leading to a hall upstairs where my children's room and the rest of the living quarters were located. There were two doors in that room, however, one leading directly outside and one leading under the house. I had explored the area under the house a few times before moving in and was disturbed at the discarded candy wrappers, baseball cards, and trinket toys I found there. The space had dirt for a floor with a single light illuminating the only doorway. After just a few steps inside the doorway, one must duck to avoid the low ceiling and plumbing. I was bewildered why anyone would allow their children to play in such a dark, damp, bug-infested place such as this. While exploring, I found an old crib and stroller discarded under the house. I also found something else further toward the back end of this space, where one would nearly need to crawl to reach it. The corner of the house was very dark, being so far from the doorway, and placed right in the middle of this shadowy emptiness was a single wooden chair. The way it was placed gave me a feeling it served a purpose, but I dared not think what. The door, which opened inward under the house, would not latch to stay shut. So eventually I put an eye hook latch to keep it closed and tried to disturb that area as little as possible. Shortly after moving in, the voices came. Having children, one grows used to the sound they make, the laughter, the singing, the crying. It was not noticeable at first that the sounds I heard were not my children. On one afternoon, just moments after my little ones arrived home from school, I passed by my daughter's bedroom and heard one of them singing a song like little girls do when playing with their dolls. Knowing they were supposed to go directly to the kitchen table and do homework after coming home, I was not too pleased to see one of my daughters off playing. Their bedroom door never seemed to stay open on its own, so I found myself talking through the door to my daughter and telling her to do her homework first. The singing immediately stopped, but she never came out of the room. I called her again, noting only months later how odd it was that I did not enter the room as I would normally have done, and heard her voice reply from behind me down the hall. She had been in the bathroom all that time, and no one was in that room. All my girls were at the other end of the house. On another occasion, the entire family was perched on one of my daughter's beds while I read a story to them. It was dusk and all was quiet in the house except the sound of my voice reading. I suddenly heard a noise that I should not have been hearing, given the circumstances, and shushed the children for a moment while I listened. You have to understand that I lived in the mountains, a small village with a population of 700 villagers at best. There's a decent amount of space between us and the neighbors, and I was the only family on this side of the neighborhood with children. As a general rule, the neighborhood was always quiet. I could never hear any of my neighbors from inside my house, even when they had company. After a short silence, I began to read the story again, and was interrupted once more, this time by my 7-year-old daughter. She told me she had thought she heard something too. I asked her what she heard, not having previously mentioned what I heard. My stomach dropped when she said the very thing I experienced: the crying of an infant. What's worse, the sound was coming from inside the house. By this time, I was already suspicious of the house and chose not to investigate the noise. I ignored it and dismissed it like so many other events that my sanity was not ready to handle. The first year was full of minor events. Things going missing, items falling from shelves but somehow ending up much further away from the shelf than what would seem reasonable. Children's laughter could be heard and whispering from behind closed doors of empty rooms. Events occurred more frequently when the children were away for the summer, and ironically enough, usually at dusk. And the lights, they flickered constantly or went out completely. I spent more money on light bulbs and replacing broken appliances than I ever did before or since. Toasters, vacuum cleaners, TVs, VCRs, my PC, even my car were constant mechanical headaches. There was so much static electricity in that place that the bedrooms would light up at night with blue static lights simply from moving blankets around. I remember what a marvel that was for the children. This was an every night occurrence. After the first year I decided, being a Christian, I would take the children around the house and anoint every door with oil. I felt a little silly doing such things, but was desperate and willing to try anything that might help me feel comfortable in my own home for once. We prayed and blessed the house and then tried to forget all about what was happening. I didn't tell the children the real reason for the blessing so as not to scare them. They had no idea what was happening to us in the house. Funny thing, it actually worked. For 2 years, nothing unusual happened. And like anything else, when something dwindles away slowly, you hardly notice it happening and then forget about it altogether. I'd finally grown accustomed to the house and did indeed forget. 2 years later, that would change for the worse. A few weeks before school was to end and the children would be going away on vacation, it dawned on me that the house was still. I had forgotten all about our blessing and suddenly realized how quiet everything was now. I couldn't help but smile and chuckled at myself for not noticing it sooner. That day it came back, and worse. Doors would open in front of me as I was passing through the hall, blocking my way. The toaster rattled when no one was near it. Items continued to disappear and things continued to be knocked off shelves. A remote control toy car that had been placed on the kitchen counter moved and stopped intermittently across the tiled countertop. I even managed to call the kids into the kitchen on time to witness it. It would move forward, then stop again, and then nothing. I did this several times, and my counters appeared to me to be very level. The wheels on this car, being an old toy, were quite stiff for it to roll on its own. Each time it moved, we could clearly hear the little motor inside rev. Out of curiosity, I checked the remote that was also on the counter. I thought perhaps the button was stuck on it, causing the car to function on its own. I was shocked to find that there were no batteries in either the car or the remote. One evening, while putting away magazines next to my TV, it shut off. Having burnt out a TV as well as 2 VCRs simply by touching a button, considering all the static electricity in the house, I was thinking perhaps it had something to do with my hand being somewhat close to the side of the television. To test this theory, I again moved my hand toward the TV after turning it on at the power button. Again it shut off. It did this several times. Each time I reached for the TV, it shut off. There were no other adults in the house, and my children were in bed, so I am certain no one was playing with a remote around the corner. And being so far from the neighbors, most homes being vacation rentals anyhow, it's highly likely that another neighbor remote could be activating my TV. It happened every single time, without fail, about half a dozen times, or more. When I reached to turn the TV on with a power button yet again, fascinated by this phenomena, instead of waiting for me to turn it on so I could watch it shut off on its own, it actually turned on this time before I could touch it. That was the last time it happened. It never did that again. The rest of the time I lived in that home, and I still have that same TV, even to this day, and it has not happened again. Shortly afterward, my daughters experienced a loud noise one night in their closet. I had heard nothing from downstairs, so they investigated on their own and found that a heavy box of books had fallen from their closet shelf. I had a lot of boxes stacked up there, but this box, having no lid, had been placed all by itself on the middle of the shelf. It fit entirely on the shelf and did not hang over the edge in any way. I could find no reason for this heavy box that my children could not even reach with a chair to have fallen. They brought me the books in armfuls the next morning before school and told me the story. After they left, I thought about putting the books away, but I would have to admit I was a little freaked to go back into their room. About an hour later, my excited 2-year-old took me by the hand and quickly dragged me to his sister's room. Not having any toys in the closet, he had never any reason to go in there before that day, but that is exactly where he dragged me to. He pointed at the one empty spot on the shelf where the box of books had been, and this very nonverbal child looked at me and said, "Moser," meaning monster. Before then, I hadn't known that he even knew that word. He was a smart child, but chose not to communicate much with words until he was about 3. The closer it got to the children leaving, the more fearful I became. I could clearly see things were stepping up a bit. I was in my room one evening reading a book in bed while everyone in the house was asleep. I noticed out of the corner of my eye the curtain I had put up at the bottom of the staircase to give my room a bit of privacy started to move. I ignored it, but it happened again. Finally telling myself, "You can do this," I stared straight at the curtain and waited. I know how tired eyes can play tricks on people, so I was determined to be sure what it was that I thought I was seeing. It happened again. This was not just a curtain, but rather a very heavy drape. It hung a bit too long for the stairway, so a good portion of it dragged on the floor. The curtain was moving sideways, not forward and back, like a breeze blowing through, but sideways. How does a heavy drape dragging on the floor with no open windows or doors actually move sideways several times? And remember, that door in my room that led under the house, the one that would never latch shut. And one evening at dusk, as it would have it, I was sitting at my desk right next to that door, typing an email to my sister when I noticed the sheer curtain that separated my bedroom from my little office moved. It actually lifted completely upward as if someone were brushing it aside to come into the room. I had actually believed someone was coming into the room. The movement was slow, and I watched it fall back into place. The movement was slow, and I watched it again. The second it was back in place, the door beside me slammed shut. I have not one clue just how that could have happened when the door was already closed within the door frame. It was up against the door frame, but simply not latched. How could a door slam with nowhere to go? I unlatched it and pushed on the door. It wouldn't budge. I realized it was latched and opened it up to look under the house. I saw nothing, but didn't stay long to really know for sure. The sooner I shut the door, the happier I'd be. When I tried to shut it, the door would not latch again. I yanked and pulled that door with all of my might and couldn't close it. A male friend who happened to be at the house at that time tried with all his strength to slam that door into place. It was not going to happen. That door would just not latch again. Finally, the day came in early June when the children left for vacation with their father. My youngest, who stayed home with me, stood outside the front door with me to wave goodbye. I watched as they drove down the road and out of sight. When I turned around to go back inside, I found I couldn't move. I realized, with them being gone and my son not being all that verbal at his young age, if I were to hear voices or laughter, I could no longer explain it away and attribute it to my girls. I would have to stop the denial and face the reality of what I was dealing with. I finally forced myself to go back inside. I didn't know what to do with myself, with the girls gone, and I really wanted to get the house out of my mind, so I put a movie on for my son and I to watch. We both fell asleep on the couch before the movie was over. I woke up, yes, at dusk. I laid on the couch for a few minutes, watching the ceiling grow darker as the sun began to set. I could hear my son breathing heavy next to me, still asleep. Then she spoke. I heard a voice clear as day, though what was said was not so clear. It was a female, a small girl, and the way one's tone of voice rises at the end of a sentence when it's a question gave me a clear indication that that was exactly what she was doing. It was clearly 3 syllables long. She was asking me a question. My instinct tells me she was saying, "Where'd they go?" Her voice sounded like it was coming from just down the hall, either from my girl's room or from the staircase leading to my room downstairs, which was right outside my girl's room. It had a strange echo quality to it. It's very hard to explain, but it was as if you record a voice on 2 separate tape recorders and then play them back at exactly the same time. An echo, but occurring at the same time, not right after. I guess by definition, not really an echo then. I suppose you could say it sounded like she was talking in a tunnel. It was very loud. There's no mistaking that I heard it or that it was coming from inside my house. I've been awake for at least 15 minutes or so, so it's doubtful I was dreaming. The second I heard the voice, my entire body stiffened and froze. I couldn't move. I didn't try, but if I had, I don't think I could have moved at all. I felt my son's body stiffen as well, and his breathing seemed to stop. When the voice stopped, he took a deep breath, rolled over, and stayed asleep. My first reaction was to grab him and run. I can't explain exactly why I didn't. All I can say was that somehow, if I had run out of that house, I knew I would never be able to come back. There was nowhere to go, and everything we owned was in that house. I had to stick it out until I could find another place to live. To run now would only mean defeat and never being able to come back. Instead, I grabbed the phone and called a friend. I had no intention of ever telling anyone what had happened, not even my friend. I simply needed to hear a real voice. I needed some form of contact with a reality outside my own. Little world of fears that I couldn't escape. After only a short time, I couldn't help myself. I broke down crying and finally told her what had happened. My son and I slept in the living room for at least 3 weeks straight after that incident, with the lights on. I prayed that God would get us out of that house, and just 3 months later, after having dealt with this thing for 4 years, I was told the owner was selling the house. We had to leave. I finally found another place to go, but it was over 100 years old. When I first opened the door to check this house out, my son said, "This is a scary house, Mommy." I just wasn't sure what to do. I went back 7 times, often bringing others with me, and secretly watching their reaction to get a feel for this new house. Just when I decided to take it, I sat down and prayed that if this house was not good for us, slammed the door on my opportunity. The next day, I was to meet with a realtor to sign the paperwork, but she had rented it out from underneath me. It wasn't meant to be. About 2 years later, around 6 a.m., that house once again vacant, after having many tenants come and go in such a short time, unexplainably burnt down. Had we moved into that house, we would have been asleep at that hour. I learned a short time later from the realtor's daughter that she had had frightening experiences in the house and believed it to be haunted. God was watching out for us. Is it the town? Is it the rich history of the area that causes so many things to happen in such a small place? I'm sure I'll never know, but I'm content with that as long as I will never have to deal with such a situation again. We did eventually find a home, and as luck would have it, we moved out on October the 31st, Halloween, to a house just around the corner. I'm still cautious every time I pass by that old place. I don't want it to follow me home.